Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to our moderated public forum for the three candidates for the position of Phoenix Police Chief. I'm Julie Waters. I'm the Communications Director for the City of Phoenix, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here in person, tuning in online through phoenix.gov, and on air through Phoenix TV. Before we begin, we'd like to welcome and acknowledge members of the Phoenix City Council who are here as attendees: Vice Mayor Gallego, Councilman Jim Waring, and Councilman Michael Nowakowski. Also in attendance tonight, numerous community leaders who have joined us and have taken an active role with this recruitment process, and our city manager and assistant city manager are also attendees here this evening. Let's talk about why we are here. Tonight is another opportunity for the public to have a voice in the selection process for our new police chief. Let me give you some background on what has been done to this point. Last November, 7 community meetings were held to get feedback from community leaders, the business community, neighborhood groups, and others on what they thought were the most important traits in a police chief. In addition, in November, the city sent out a community survey. More than 1,200 residents filled out the survey, letting city management know what they wanted in a chief. Then, all of that input was received from the community groups and from the survey. They were given to the city's HR department to create a profile of what the city was looking for in a new chief. In January, a national recruitment began. The city received 65 applications. In April, the city announced 10 finalists. After one dropped out, the process was whittled down to 9 semifinalists who participated in interview panels with members of the community and city executives. They were asked a variety of questions on their background and qualifications, including questions that gave insight into their policing philosophy with leadership, community engagement, and organizational change. Now, here we are in June, and we have 3 finalists. These finalists will participate in tonight's forum and then be part of interview panels tomorrow with members of the city manager's office and community stakeholders. The new chief is expected to be announced in July and officially start work in October, shortly before our current police chief, Joseph Yonner, retires. Now, here's what we need you to know about tonight's moderated forum. The questions used tonight were submitted by members of the community via email or voicemail or on a handwritten card tonight. Our goal is to have these finalists answer as many questions as possible this evening. Unfortunately, we do not anticipate being able to answer every single question that was submitted due to time constraints. However, every question will be turned over to the new chief so that person can look and see what is important to the community. The candidates have not seen the questions in advance. They will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. And we have a timekeeper here to moderate. In addition, we have an interpreter here should anyone need help with interpretation, and we have headsets in the back. We do have some ground rules tonight, and we are requesting a few items from the audience. Could you please silence your cell phones? We want to respect the process tonight, and we ask that audience members refrain from giving positive or negative responses, such as cheering or booing. We want the candidates to feel as comfortable as possible when sharing their views. Also, in an effort to keep the evening moving on and to give each candidate as much time as possible tonight, let's hold off on applause until the very end. Restrooms are located downstairs. There's also a drinking fountain downstairs. And there's an elevator right outside these glass doors that will lead to the downstairs. We are monitoring the clock tonight, and our intent is to keep the evening moving by getting in as many questions as possible. We plan to wrap up this forum at 7:30, and everyone is invited to join us in the atrium across the street for a meet and greet with the finalists. The atrium is the lobby of City Hall. So, to our 3 finalists, take a deep breath. We are about to formally introduce you to this audience. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight, Rick DeBrule. Mr. DeBrule is currently the Communications Director for the State Bar of Arizona. He has been a professional broadcaster for more than 35 years, spending 3 decades as a reporter and anchor for 12 News, the NBC affiliate here in Phoenix. He's also an ESPN racing commentator. At the Arizona State Bar, Mr. DeBrule oversees all internal and external communication for the nonprofit organization that operates under the supervision of the Arizona Supreme Court, regulating approximately 18,000 attorneys. With that, Rick DeBrule.
Well, thanks a lot. Let me first say it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this process. And I realize you guys are sitting there in the hot seat, but you have all these people who've come down, and I think they're all very supportive of what wants to happen. And by the way, we do have additional seating downstairs, so I know some of you are standing in the back. If you'd like to go downstairs and be seated, I believe you can hear and see everything down there. Let me point out to start off with that this is not a debate. This is not a situation where we're going to be asking questions and we're expecting them to play point-counterpoint tonight. This is really a job interview. You just happen to be able to get the opportunity and the privilege of being able to sit in on this job interview. So sometimes we'll be asking all three candidates the same questions. Sometimes we might ask one of them a question and ask another one a different question. It just kind of depends upon what happens tonight. Also, I should point out, I know this is going to come as a big shock, but a number of you have asked the same question. Some of you have asked it differently, and so we may be combining some of those questions into one. And so while it might not be the exact wording of the question and the way you asked it, it'll be the general topic. And in addition to the questions that came in tonight, you see these blue cards that you might have filled out. We also have questions that were emailed in that we got on white cards. So we'll be mixing a lot of those up. And as I pointed out, we've got many of them that we've grouped because many of them asking the same questions. So let's get started with our three finalists. And after their introduction, they're each going to be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves and tell our audience about why they should be the next Phoenix Chief of Police. We'll start with Mike Kurtenbach. Please raise your hand. Peter Newsham, and Jerry Williams. Now, I mentioned that this is a job interview. If you were at a job interview, the first question we'd ask is, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get here? So we're going to start with Peter and ask, how did you get here? Tell us a little bit. Once again, 2 minutes to tell your story.
Starting with me?
I'm sorry, Mike.
Well, thank you, Rick, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. First and foremost, I want to say what an honor it is to sit next to Chief Newsham and Chief Williams as your police chief finalists for what I unapologetically believe is the best police department and the best city in the nation. I'll have the opportunity to tell you about myself professionally, so I want to take this 2 minutes just to share with you a little bit about me personally, who I am. First and foremost, I'm a husband to an amazing woman who puts up with me, the father to two great kids, ages 25 and 23. And my journey to this chair began years before I was born, when my mother, father, and brother immigrated from the former West Germany to the United States. They came with 2 suitcases and a trunk in pursuit of the American dream. I was the first member of my family born here in the U.S. I was born just up the street at St. Joseph's Hospital, in fact. I grew up in a household where English was not the primary language, which is very similar to many of the households that our men and women provide exceptional police service to each and every day in this city. My father was a masonry contractor. He built the house that I was raised in the Westwood neighborhood, just off of 23rd Avenue in Camelback. Went to St. Gregory's grade school, K through 8, in Brophy before I went off to college. On May 7th, 1990, I joined the Phoenix Police Department, following the footsteps of my older brother who joined the department in 1968. His daughter, my niece, also worked for the Phoenix Police Department as a communications operator. And although neither of them work for this amazing organization anymore, if you do the math, that means that Kurtenbach has been a member of the Phoenix Police Department for 48 years. So as a family and as an individual, we are very, very invested in this community. This is my community. As I said, I know I'll get the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about myself professionally throughout the evening. But again, I thank you all for being here and for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about ourselves with you.
Peter, your 2 minutes.
Good evening. This is my first time publicly speaking here in the city of Phoenix, and it's extremely important for me to express my condolences to the city of Phoenix, to the Phoenix Police Department, and most importantly to the family of David Glasser, who gave up his life for this city. I have to agree with Mike what he said about the Phoenix Police Department. You run an excellent operation here in Phoenix. I am one of the assistant chiefs in Washington, D.C., joined the police department in 1989. I was very fortunate to get promoted very early in my career. So I've been in a command role since 2000, so I've done 16 years in a command role and 14 of those years as an assistant chief. I've served for two excellent chiefs of police. The first is Chief Charles Ramsey, who sat on President Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And more recently, I've served under Chief Lanier, who was the first female chief of police in Washington, D.C. Like I said, I've had experience at 4 presidential inaugurations. I was one of the first responders for a metro train accident that we had in Washington, D.C., where we unfortunately lost 9 lives. I was on the scene, one of the first on the scene for our very unfortunate shooting at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., where we had 12 folks that were just coming to work that day that were murdered by Aaron Alexis. As far as my philosophy on policing, it's very simple. I would like, if I was the chief of police in Phoenix, for every interaction that a Phoenix police officer had with somebody every single day, every single time, regardless of whether it was an arrest, a traffic stop, going into a coffee shop to grab a cup of coffee, I would like folks to look back at that police officer and say, those are the good guys. Those are the people that we trust, those are the people that we respect, and those are the people who are going to treat us right. So that's what I would expect as your chief. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Finally, Jerry Williams.
So thank you. First and foremost, hello, Phoenix. So happy to be back home, sitting here with you, introducing myself to some of you whom I've recently met and to others whom I've known for many, many years. My name is Jerry Williams. I'm the police chief for the city of Oxnard. And quite frankly, it is just so great to be sitting here before you today, looking at church members, looking at community members, looking at family and friends, sitting before you, hoping to realize my dream of being your next Phoenix police chief. I have been with the Oxnard Police Department for 5 years, and I left home. I left the comforts of home to get that professional experience that I thought that I needed to have to be the Phoenix Police Chief. It wasn't easy. It was challenging. I left my family here. I left my children here. I left my home here. But I am here to tell you that that experience has had me to grow leaps and bounds in leadership, management, organization, taking care of police departments, and building and engaging the community. In the Oxnard Police Department, we are a full-service city. It is the 19th most populous city in the state of California, and the state of California have 39 million people there. So I've run the gamut of services as the chief of police there. Also coupled with that, too, some of you may know and may be aware that I rose to the ranks of assistant chief. So I started off as a patrol officer out in Maryville and became the assistant chief over South Zone Patrol, where I worked with the SWAT team. I had the K-9 unit, I had the air unit, and 4 patrol precincts all under my watch and under my command. As a commander, I worked the city manager liaison position, and that's the position that is the liaison between the city managers and the entire city council. I am here to say that I'm looking forward to coming back home, and I'm the only person sitting here today that has police chief's experience and the ultimate decision maker experience. I am hoping that you see me as your next police chief for the city of Phoenix. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. And once again, we need people, if you can, to go to the overflow room downstairs. You can hear, I believe you can watch as well downstairs. We've got cameras, so...
We're going to open this right now so some people can...
So some folks can come on down and take advantage of these seats in the front. We appreciate the fact that everybody's turned out, but we just can't fit everybody into the chambers themselves. So, and most importantly, we have to keep the aisles open. We do have police officers on hand, and we're going to make sure that happens. So let's start getting to the serious stuff, the questions that have been asked, and I have in my hand a whole bunch of questions on one particular topic, so that's what we're going to start with, and it deals with the issue of de-escalation, which has been controversial. The concept of de-escalation being that in a potentially deadly force situation, can a police officer reduce the risk of using deadly force, or how quickly does it go to it? Obviously, members of certain community groups have been big proponents of that. Members of police unions have had concerns about it. And Jerry Williams, since you finished that group, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on de-escalation? Do you believe we should bring it to the Phoenix Department, and if so, how?
So thank you for the question, Rick. De-escalation training is already at the Phoenix Police Department. So after realizing and understanding and implementing some of the President's 21st Century Policing Plan philosophies, all departments have had to look at what we do and how we manage and how we enforce what the different things that we do and the tactics that we have. So I am a big proponent for de-escalation of force. Quite frankly, in my department, we have reality-based training as well as de-escalation training. But it's more than just the de-escalation of force. What it is building relationships and connections with the community, because if the community trusts you to be just and fair, you will be more likely, you will be less likely to use more force than you would have. So I'm a proponent for de-escalation of force. The Phoenix Police Department has begun that process. I would continue that process, but I would also invite the community to be partners with us, to join in with Citizens Police Academies so that we can learn and we can teach you what our force is and why we do what we do. I think that's a way to bridge that gap and build that. So thank you.
Peter Newsham, I think we're going to have all three of you answer this question, so it's your turn.
Yeah, you know, de-escalation is a term that's being thrown about, and people are taking different sides on de-escalation. Anytime that a police officer uses force, it has to be done professionally, and it has to be done carefully. I don't think we are at a point in policing right now where we know exactly what the right way is to apply force. We definitely have to look at the way we're applying force. There has been some recent leadership meetings between chiefs of police where they have said we have to do a better job like they do in Europe when you're handling folks with edged weapons, and I believe that to be true. We are going to have to, as a big city police department, take violent offenders into custody. But the mindset that a police officer has to have when they're dealing with somebody like that is you don't know why they're violent at that particular time. It could be an addiction issue. It could be a mental health issue. And I think if officers have built up relationships in the community and they know who these folks are and they know why they're acting the way that they are, then we got to give the officers the tools that they need to be able to bring folks into custody safely. And we have to have a respect when we're under those circumstances to have a respect for all human life. The officer's life, of course, is extremely important, but the community's life is important, and anybody who's onlooking's life is important. And to the extent that we can use force and protect lives at the same time, I think that's really the goal of any police department. Thank you.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
So as an assistant chief, one of my duties is to oversee training for the Phoenix Police Department, and that's critically important for your officers to have the tools that they need to do their job effectively. And the reality is there are times that officers must use force. But if we recognize as an organization that every encounter we have with our community is a transaction, we're either making a deposit or we're taking a withdrawal, we know how important those encounters are. So as a leader in this organization, we have taken concrete steps to equip our officers with the tools that they need to make the best decisions that they can based on the information at hand. De-escalation training is something that we have provided our officers. Our officers are all required to go through a 40-hour annual training module. As part of that training module, which we are prepared to wrap up here in the next month, they get training on crisis communication. They get training on mental health disorder and response. It isn't just classroom training, but then it's reality-based training to show that what they've learned in the classroom they can apply out in the street when they have very limited information and they have to act very quickly. Well, in addition to that module, what we've done is we've rolled out specific de-escalation training to our officers. And those officers that are concerned about the term, really what it is, it's back to basics. Ultimately, our job, our most important tool is to effectively communicate with those we interact with. We recognize that the uniform can be very alarming to some, especially to those in crisis. So if we give our officers some other tools in that tool belt so they can learn to calm the situation down, so they can resolve the scenario peacefully, then we're doing our job effectively as leaders. That's what we're doing as an organization. That's what we commit to keep doing going forward through more reality-based training for our folks. Thank you.
And I think the comments that you've made just kind of lead into our next question, which is another one of those questions that many people have asked, multiple people, so we want to have all three of you answer as well. And it deals with how does a police officer, how does a police department deal with the people they come into contact with who are mentally ill? What type of training, what would you do to help your officers deal with that situation so that it doesn't escalate? And once again, I believe we'll start with Peter. You mentioned that in your comments, as a matter of fact, the mentally ill.
Yeah, the training is critically important for your officers when you're dealing with folks with mental health issues. If you have crisis intervention officers, and as Mike had just suggested, there are some folks who have mental health issues where the uniform itself can create a situation which is a lot more dangerous than it needs to be. And really the key is to get into the officers the training so they have it in their mind that they could, in any situation, they could be dealing potentially with somebody with a mental health issue. You're not going to solve your mental health issues here in Phoenix by arresting folks who have mental health issues. You have to get those folks into treatment. I don't know to what extent Phoenix is doing that right now. San Antonio has an excellent program where police officers, if they're dealing with somebody who's committed a minor offense, and they conduct an interview with that subject, and it indicates that they do have some type of a mental health issue, then as opposed to being taken to jail and being arrested, they're taken to a mental health treatment facility. And I think really that's the way that you want to deal with that issue. Get the folks that the help they need. There's a couple of things from a practical standpoint. It doesn't do your police officers any good to come off the street and process those arrests when you're not doing them any good, because all you're doing is arresting them over and over again. If you get them the mental health, the long-term mental health treatment, so they won't be committing offenses, the city's going to be a better place for it. So thanks for asking that question.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
In August of 2014, we had a very tragic incident that happened in the Maryville precinct. I was a commander of that precinct when a woman was shot and killed while my officers were attempting to serve a mental health pickup order. And what that really highlighted for us as an organization was the need to once again equip our officers with some additional training so that they can resolve situations peacefully. This was a situation where a woman was in crisis and she needed help, and it did not end the way anybody wanted it to end. As a result, as a department, we've created a mental health executive advisory board, recognizing that although we, the police officers, are the front line, and quite frankly, when people call 911, I think it's safe to say that every other form of government has failed in one capacity or another when we respond. But again, we want to give our officers some other resources that they can tap into, and that's exactly what we've done. In addition to that, we've created a crisis intervention squad on the Phoenix Police Department whose job it is to go out and serve those mental health pickup orders. They are all crisis intervention team trained, that 40-hour block of training, and then they have additional training above that. We're preparing to bring a second squad on board to augment that initial squad. But beyond that, we're also training our patrol officers and giving them the skills that they need, because those two squads might not always be available to resolve scenarios. So ultimately what this comes back to, it comes back to awareness, it comes back to training, it comes back to sharing information. In the President's Task Force report on 21st Century Policing, one of those 59 recommendations suggested that all officers should receive CIT. The experts that I have worked with here in the city of Phoenix and with the Crisis Response Network don't necessarily believe that's the case. But what they do offer is an 8-hour training for all officers that I commit to provide them that is a first aid of sorts so that we can, again, resolve situations peacefully and ensure everybody gets the help that they need. Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
So, Rick, thank you. The mental health crisis is not a law enforcement crisis. The mental health crisis is a community crisis. And what happens is our communities pick up the phone and they call us or call the police department when you are at your last end, at your wit's end. How can we fix that? How can we change that? I have a number of suggestions. I love the concept and idea of training our officers and being crisis intervention team officers, but it is going to take more than that. How about a concept and an idea of having a mental health professional in the car with your police officers that drives around the city, and when we have those types of calls for service, then not only do we have the person who is able to enforce things and perhaps calm things down, we also have a trained professional in the vehicle with the officer to be able to handle and manage that type of a crisis. So I've seen a number of those different templates and models throughout the state of California that I would love to bring here in the city of Phoenix. The President's Task Force does talk about training and education, but quite frankly, we're asking law enforcement to do an awful lot, folks. We are asking them to be teachers, social worker, mental health counselor, sometimes clergy person, you name it, while at the same time we want them to put hands on people and take them into jail and put them into custody. So yes, we do need to offer and provide training to our employees on calming a situation down and just sitting there and listening and talking through scenarios and situations. But at the same time, too, I would advocate and say this to our community: what are you doing to help us? And oftentimes when a police chief says that, people kind of sit back and say, whoa, did she just put me on blast and call me out? What I'm saying is, what are we as a community going to do to help this crisis and issue? So I love the concept and idea, Mike, that we have the community involved. I would solicit more involvement and have crisis intervention officers in the car with police officers to help with those scenarios and situations. So thank you.
Another question that we've gotten a number of, both online as well as people here, and I'll read one of them directly. The Black Lives Matter movement has been somewhat controversial. How does Black Lives Matter, what does Black Lives Matter mean to you as it relates to community policing? And Ms. Williams, we'll start with you.
So thank you very much. I will say this: the Black Lives Matter movement was spawned from a rash of men of color and sometimes women of color being killed by the hands of law enforcement. So it is a cry out, it is a see and listen to me and help me understand why this is happening. So I am obviously an advocate for Black Lives Matter from that respect, because that's the community coalescing and involving, but quite frankly, I'm all about all lives matter. Wouldn't it be a great world that if and when we respond to calls for service and you call us and you call your Phoenix Police Department, and every single time we come out, we do right by you. Every single time we take care of things, every single time we look at you and we understand and share compassion and passion for you. So the Black Lives Matter movement is a call and a cry out for us as a community, we as law enforcement, to really recognize and know the importance of community connections, police legitimacy and trust, and just bear respect for human life. So if our employees and our officers understand that piece and component and know that, I think it would be a better place. It's also important too, though, to have the voice of law enforcement at the table as well. We could sit all day and talk about how horrible law enforcement is, but we have men and women who are standing back there in the back in that blue uniform that looks so sharp and so amazing, who want nothing more than to do right by the community that we serve. So what I would suggest is that we have law enforcement in the table with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the All Lives Matter movement, and we really seek to have humane reactions between and among one another. So thank you.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
Chief Williams is absolutely right. It's so critically important for law enforcement to have a seat at the table. And I see Reverend Reginald Walton here from Black Lives Matter, and I've been blessed to have a seat at the table with Reverend Walton. He and I were at the Noble Conference here not too long ago, and I thought it was framed very perfectly when people say Black Lives Matter. Why Black Lives Matter? And here's the way it was framed. And it was described this way, that if you respond to a housing development, all houses in that development matter. But if one house is on fire, then it's critically important that the fire department go to that house to put that fire out and make those residents safe. For somebody like me, a simple man, it really helps to frame it so perfectly. And what Reverend Walton has done, he's fostered that dialogue so that all members of the community and law enforcement have the opportunity to sit together so that we learn from each other, so that we grow with each other. I recognize that in my 26 years on the Phoenix Police Department that I have not necessarily served in communities where I look like those that I have served. But what I have learned is that through partnership and relationship, by sitting down together and having that cup of coffee, engaging in real conversation over lunch or dinner, that's how we move the needle. Because at the end of the day, we are so much more similar than we are different. So yes, Chief Williams is 100% right. All lives matter, and we need to continue to work together. And you have my commitment that I will build on what we've already done here in the city of Phoenix and continue to do that for the benefit of every resident of the city of Phoenix. Thank you.
Mr. Newsham?
Yeah, I see the Black Lives Matter movement as a serious frustration within the African American community. It's a frustration with seeing young men of color die at the hands of the government. And we have seen some scenarios that have played out on national television, which is something that none of us are comfortable with. The frustration and the way that it's being portrayed and the way that it's being brought about in front of police agencies, I think is critically important to positive change for police departments. Some folks may not like it, but if you're going to sit in as the chief of police in any major city, and you don't have thick skin and you're not going to listen to the concerns of the community and you're not going to have a willingness to change, you're not going to be successful. You have to sit, like Mike said and like Jerry said, you have to sit and you have to listen to that criticism. That's real criticism. We do not want to lose any young people at the hands of the government. That's something that we have to take very seriously as a police department. We have to work every single day to make sure that that does not happen. So if you have folks that are going to be involved in the incidents that we said, you got to get them out of your police department. And then the other thing is that you have to be very careful and very professional in the way that you use force, especially force that could potentially be fatal. So my thoughts are that the criticism is much deserved in law enforcement. It allows us to take a critical look at how we are as police executives, and I think we have to take it very seriously and work to make the changes so that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore in policing.
We have several questions about the concept of community policing, so I'm going to ask each one of you a different one, and you can answer them as you choose. And we'll start with Mr. Newsham, since you finished there. It said downtown Phoenix has a lot of bicycle policing. What are your thoughts on expanding bicycle policing to other neighborhoods?
To the extent that you have the capacity to have the officers out on bike, it's an excellent tool. It's a way to get the officers closer to the community. It's the way, you know, one of the things that came out of the 21st Century Task Force on Policing is you want your police department to be healthy. You want them to be healthy in mind and in body. There's no better way to get healthy than to ride a bike in 116-degree temperatures. So there's a lot of really good things about having bike patrols. It gets your officers closer to the community. In Washington, D.C., we're a lot smaller geographical in size than you are here in Phoenix. So the practical, from a practical standpoint, and I know that the force here has been shrinking because of economic reasons over recent years, as long as you have enough police officers because you have to have the ability to respond to calls for service. So it's a balance. You got to have some of your folks in motorized vehicles, but to the extent that you can expand that program, the officers love it, the community loves it. It gets your officers closer to the folks in the community. So to the extent that you can do it, and as the police department grows here in Phoenix, and my sense is that, you know, the economy has turned around here, and you're going to be in a real good position to get your officers, the strength of your department back up to a point where you can have a lot more folks out there on bikes. So I think in every aspect, it's a good idea to the extent that you can do it.
Ms. Williams, under recent chiefs, the Phoenix Police Department has continuously improved its approach to community policing, including promoting block watch, assignment of community action officers, events like Coffee and Cop. Are these sustainable, especially in our current economic environment, and what will be the next steps?
So thank you for that. Absolutely, they're sustainable. Reaching out and engaging with your community isn't something that you just take care of and manage when the budget is good. It is something that you do as an innate means and an innate way to engage your community. So Coffee with a Cop, Coffee with the Chief are just ways to engage our community. But I would take that a step further. We were successful in my agency currently to have the Spanish-speaking Citizens Police Academy, and it's a model that's been used by the Department of Justice. So I would encourage different communities, and it may not be the Spanish-speaking community, it could be the Korean-speaking community, it could be the Somalian-speaking community, have those type of police academies in conjunction with Coffee with the Cop, in conjunction with the neighborhood services, to bring people to us. It is hard to hate someone when you have a relationship with them. It is hard to really be angry with someone when you've sat down and you've had coffee, or I would say iced tea. Thank you very much in 116 degrees. I would say have iced tea with someone. It's very difficult to have that when you've built and established a relationship. So I don't want it to get lost on we need to have budget and we need to have staffing to have community connections. That's what we're supposed to do. We are here to serve you. And if that service means Coffee with a Cop, so be it. If it means lemonade and iced tea with a cop, so be it too. But I'm also an advocate of bringing people in to have them see and know what we do through Citizens Police Academies and other community police academies. So thank you for that.
And Mr. Kurtenbach, this question was emailed in and says, I live in a gated community in South Phoenix, and the one thing I rarely or hardly ever see is a patrol officer driving through making himself or herself known to the homeowners. In the future, will we ever get this type of interaction between the police officers and the neighbors?
Well, first off, going back to something Chief Newsham said, you can certainly cut weight on a bicycle at 116 degrees. There's no doubt about that. But you know what? That's a shame, because that's another failure if we have a gated community where the folks that live in that community don't know their officers. And I think there's shared responsibility there. Because you know what a member of a gated community can do? Can call his or her local precinct and provide the gate code. Or that gate code can be put into our computer-aided dispatch system so our officers know the code, so it doesn't go out over the air. So it's just something that we know, so they can enter the code and they can drive through. Because ultimately, the way we affect meaningful change, the way we forge positive relationships, is by getting to know one another. As you heard Chief Williams say, whether it's Coffee with a Cop or iced tea or lemonade or getting out on bicycles, at the end of the day, we break down barriers when we just look each other face to face. I said everybody has to eat, right? Most people like cookies. I have a little bit of a sweet tooth myself. We can do that. At the Bridge Forum, and several people in the room were there last week, I heard something that I'd never heard before. and that was cops and barbershops. What a great idea. It's yet another place for us to connect with folks. So we shouldn't be limited by gates that keep somebody in or out of a community or any other barriers. It's incumbent upon us as leaders in the Phoenix Police Department and as police professionals to find ways where we can connect. So a simple gate is something that can be easily overcome. We pass along that code, we get to know one another. That's how we move everything forward. Thank you.
This next question, once again, is for all three of you. I'm going to combine a couple questions together. We have some translated questions, in particular from Spanish language, and they're basically asking the same thing, which is, what can be done to build trust between police officers and the Spanish-speaking community? In particular, how do they communicate and build that trust? And Jerry Williams, we'll start with you.
Thank you for that question, first and foremost. Key important area, one of which I have experience in. So the city of Oxnard is about 70% Latino, primarily monolingual Spanish-speaking community. I do not speak Spanish. But what I was able to do is get officers and a public information officer and hire a public information officer to go with me to the different communities, understanding some key components about that culture, is that there are times an innate distrust for the uniform. It is at times an innate distrust for how they've seen law enforcement operate in their different countries. And I approach that quite differently than I'm certain my counterparts may. I'm a wife and a mom. And what that does is when people get to know me as Jerry the wife or Jerry the mom, as opposed to Jerry the police chief, I was able to break down a number of barriers in the Spanish-speaking community. I actually mentioned previously we held an all Spanish-speaking Citizens Police Academy, ran that for 16 weeks with community members who wanted to be involved in law enforcement and wanted to believe in what we did. And we were actually able to get 3 of the 16 people that went through that program to be part of our Chiefs Advisory Board. So connecting with that culture and that community is key, but you have to have someone to be able to speak the language while at the same time understanding the different cultural nuances that are involved in that too. I also do want to add that that connection of being the wife and the mom really resulted in something that was amazing, and I start smiling when I think about it. There was one madrina, one of the older ladies in the audience, who called me out and said, if we have a peace march, will you show up, Chief Williams? And what did I do? Showed up in uniform and marched with the Moms for Peace. So that would be my response to that question. You just have to be you, and you just have to engage the community and understand their culture.
Mr. Newsham?
Yeah, I think that with the Spanish speaker, I am not a Spanish speaker, but I think that one of the first things that I would do if I was notified that I was going to be lucky enough to be the Phoenix Chief of Police is I would go and learn how to speak Spanish. I would take a course on how to speak Spanish because I think that the Chief of Police ought to be able to communicate with that community to the extent that they can. And I think Chief Williams touched on this, and it's really important to build trust and legitimacy within that community. You have to have a relationship with your entire community where folks feel as though they can come to the police in a safe and respectful way, and that's the trust portion of it. And if you're not out there interacting with any part of your community, then they're not gonna trust you. And then the second piece to that is legitimacy. And legitimacy comes from knowing when you raise an issue with your police department that they do something about it. And as Chief Williams has mentioned, there are some folks in the Spanish-speaking community, because of the countries that they've come from, there's an automatic distrust of law enforcement. So you have to work in your police agency that much harder to gain that trust and to gain that legitimacy so that they know when they come to their police department with a concern, not only can they trust the folks that they're talking to, but the police department's going to do something to help them with their issues. So thanks for asking that.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
Thank you. Being very real, due to certain legislation and certain policing practices in this state and in this county, there are times it's very challenging for those of us that wear the blue suit to effectively engage those that we are entrusted to serve. But that's not an excuse. I mentioned serving as a Maryville precinct commander, and those of you that know Maryville, you understand it's a largely Hispanic Latino community. And what we were able to do in Maryville, which we are now replicating throughout the city, speaks to the legitimacy that Chief Newsham talked about. And that's getting to know one another. Partnered with Vidi Hernandez and the Center for Neighborhood Leadership, a bunch of young kids These kids that are so passionate about their community that didn't feel that they had a voice. And here's what we found out. As we started to meet, these kids realized what we do. And I say kids respectfully. And they went out and they surveyed their community. They administered over 400 residential surveys. And they identified where the gaps were between law enforcement and the community. They shared that with us. And then it was our job to fill those gaps. So it started off as a residential survey. Then we had some small focus groups. Then we had larger meetings. And you know what we have now? We have block watches where previously we didn't have block watches because there wasn't trust. We have relationships where previously we didn't have relationships. Any of you that know the Estrella Supermoms out there off of 75th Avenue and Osborne know if you're going to go to one of their meetings, you better go hungry because you're going to get fed. But think about how far we've come. And that's something that we've been able to replicate through South Phoenix, West Phoenix, and elsewhere, all because we break down those barriers and we get to know to one another and we commit to partnership.
Let's talk about hiring police officers. And there's really two aspects to this question. Number one is, what would be your plan for hiring more officers? And number two, how would you make sure that they reflect the community that they serve? And I believe we'll start with Mr. Newsham there in the center.
Yep, you're in a position here in Phoenix where you're in the process of hiring and you're playing catch-up because of attrition. The first thing I'll say about hiring police officers is it's an extremely, you have to be extremely careful when you do it to make sure you get the right person. I heard Chief Manger speak during Police Week, and he was talking about one of his officers who had died in the line of duty. He was killed as the result of a drunk driver striking him. And he said he spoke with the parents of Officer Noah Leone. And his parents said to Chief Manger, they said, you know, we never thought he was going to be a police officer. And Chief Manger, well, why not? Well, he's a very sympathetic and very empathetic guy. And we didn't think he would be a police officer. And then Chief Manger said to them, he said, listen, if you have somebody who's sympathetic and you have somebody who's empathetic and they want to be involved in public service, that's a police officer. And I really took that to heart. So when you're hiring and identifying those folks, you know, to get them onto your police department, that's critical. If you hire a bad police officer, you're going to have that bad police officer for 25 or 30 years. So you got to be very careful. With regards to recruiting from different communities, you have to do it. Your police department has to reflect the community that they serve. The reason is that the kids in the community can look up, and this is what we want from all of our kids, is to look up and say, hey, listen, I want to be a police officer one day. I want to be just like him. And I think if your department reflects your community, you're more likely to have people look up and say, you know, I want to be just like that officer. I want to be just like that officer. So I think that's why it's critically important for us to continue to be able to attract really good people to the department, and so that we'll have really good people here in Phoenix for 25 to 30 years once we hire them. So thank you for asking that.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
Thank you. I can talk very directly about this because I'm in charge of hiring for the Phoenix Police Department. So let me tell you what we've done as an organization. We have a very diverse recruitment team, and many of you in the room have taken advantage of that team and invited them to your community events, your churches. We've worshiped together. We've partnered together, because here's what we have. Back in October of 2008, your Phoenix Police Department had 3,388 sworn members. As of May 6th, we were down to 2,711. Very dedicated men and women. But here's when we look at the demographics of the police department, and thankfully through the support of the mayor and council, we're hiring. When you look at that 2,711 sworn, roughly 76% of those are white. They look like me. Since we started hiring a year ago, the 300 that we've hired, that number has been reduced down to 64%. So 36% of our new hires are not white. And that's pretty incredible, and that's something that we should celebrate, because when you look at data that's provided by the Department of Justice, historically, only 27% of those that wear the uniform anywhere in the country through the 18,000 law enforcement agencies that exist, only 27% are non-white. Now, the city of Phoenix, we're 40.5% Hispanic. Before we started this new hiring, only 17% of our officers were Hispanic Latino. Now we're up to 28%. We're 6.5% in the city African American. When we started, we were 4% on the department. Now we're 5%. So clearly we're moving in the needle in the right direction. And when we talk about diversity, and I love how Chief Williams talks about being that maternal side, Well, we were 12%, now we're over 17% female. So clearly we're doing something right. But we need more of that, and that's where we need that partnership so we can get our recruitment team out there and make them realize that this is an incredibly noble profession. Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
So thank you for that question. I love the idea of recruitment and hiring. Twice in my career, in the 22 years that I was with the Phoenix Police Department, I was assigned to hiring. I was a recruitment officer at first, and secondly, a background investigator. So I know what it takes to be a police officer. But once again, I go back to engaging the community. In the area and the department that I have right now, we've been successful in having homegrown folks want to be police officers. What better person is it than someone who lives and works in his or her community to be that first responder to respond to the call of service that you may have, that you need someone to show up? So what I would do is I would definitely continue on the path that the Phoenix Police Department is on in recruiting and hiring, but I'd want to take that a step further because I don't think that we're expanding our net large enough. I do think that there are second career people out there, people who may have started in engineering, who may have been teachers, who may have been something different, who are looking to be and work in a noble profession, and that profession is law enforcement. I think we need to do more of a reach in that regard and in that respect. I will say I wish this idea was mine, but one of my good friends whom I talked to in preparation for this process thought about having a professional hiring person to come into the Phoenix Police Department, not to separate the sworn from what's going on in hiring, but actually to add a person who comes in who is a professional at hiring, recruiting, and lastly, retaining our police officers, because that's where I think we're missing the boat. So my girlfriend's here in the audience tonight. She came up with that one, so I would really like to augment that, add that to the equation so we could really look at different ways and means and look at those second career folks as well as engaging folks in the community, looking at you, and sending those of us out who look a little bit different out to the community to talk about the benefits and the value and the joy of being a Phoenix police officer. So thank you.
So we'll get through some more questions, so we'll ask you each one of these individually, and Ms. Williams, we'll start with you. This person sent an email in, said, I would like to ask, what are your general thoughts on motorcycle clubs? You.
Oh, I didn't expect that one. All right. General thought on motorcycle clubs. I would say if the motorcycle clubs are legal and are within the law, welcome to the United States. Welcome to the fact that you can do and abide by the laws as long as you don't infringe on anyone else. But I would say this, I would want them to be safe, I would want them to engage with the community, and I would want them to add value. I think our community is lacking some of those value-added pieces with these different clubs that are formulated. So I'm not against motorcycle clubs. I would say I would want them to be legal. I would want them to follow the rules, laws, and regulations. But as Americans, God bless the Constitution, we can't discriminate. So thank you for that unique question, whoever you are out there for that one.
Another email question, we'll give this one to Mr. Newsham. What is your general feeling regarding the transient problem in our city, transients?
You know, you talk about community, and this is, you know, I've been thinking long and hard on this. When you talk about a community, the community is everybody. It's your transients, it's your offenders, it's your folks with mental health issues, it's your folks with addiction issues, it's the folks that live in the gated communities, it's the folks that don't live in the gated communities. So the transient folks are exactly the same. You know, you have to find a way to communicate with that group. See what their wants and needs are, and if it's something that the police department can accommodate, then you try and do it. You know, and the question for Chief Williams, although it was an original question, it really brings to mind the fact that, you know, we live in these big cities, and there are a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas on how to have fun. And the way to do that as a police department is just to make sure, like Chief Williams said, if they're doing it legally and they're respecting everybody else when they're doing it, you know, the kind of club that you're in really doesn't make a difference. I had the unique experience of going through Comic-Con. I have not seen that on the East Coast, but my wife and I were going out to get a bite for lunch, and we walked right through it. And you know, it just, as I was walking through, it occurred to me, you know, it's different strokes for different folks. And they were having fun. Nobody was getting in trouble. Unique and interesting, but you know, and that's what you have to do as a police department. I saw the Phoenix Police Department out there, and they were having, you know, they were doing what they needed to do to keep, you know, make sure they had police presence there. But it was actually a great experience. So, thanks for that question.
Mr. Kurtenbach, this question came in through voicemail and says, what does the next chief of police plan on doing as far as getting anti-drug programs like DARE back in the schools and also getting more resource officers in schools?
Education and awareness is absolutely key. We all need information, and I know I've said this a couple times. I'm blessed to oversee the School Resource Officer Program for the Phoenix Police Department also that's housed in our Community Relations Bureau. Right now we have 76 school resource officers that are out there in the schools, but when you add in all of the schools, elementary, middle, high school, all the charter schools, there are well over 400 schools in the city of Phoenix alone. So while 76 is a good number, it's not nearly enough. But remember, I mentioned earlier where we're at in terms of our staffing, and quite frankly, those school districts pay for those officers, 3/4 of those salaries. So that's a little bit challenging. So we need to think beyond just the school resource officers. We have a gang resistance education and awareness training that we have here in the city of Phoenix as well. And I'm very excited to say, as we're growing our Community Relations Bureau through securing a COPS hiring grant, 25 new officers are rolling into the Bureau this month, we'll be bringing back the PAL program. We haven't had a police athletic league in the city of Phoenix for over 20 years. And they can augment the work of those school resource officers because they can model positive behavior for those kids. They can show them the right way and get them away from doing things that we would rather they not do. That's really what we need to do, form some of those unique partnerships to teach the kids the right way by modeling the behavior, and I think ultimately we all win when we do that.
This next question is going to be for all three of you, and it's one we've got from multiple sources. Phoenix is going to go to body-worn cameras. What is your experience and expertise and your thoughts on body cameras? And Mr. Newsham, we'll start with you.
We are going through the same process in Washington, D.C. We are implementing body cameras. As a matter of fact, by the end of July, we will have body-worn cameras on all of our patrol officers. The body-worn cameras are not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of the problems in policing, but it is beneficial in that you can have a real-time view of exactly what occurred, and it works both ways. The officers in Washington, D.C. have really embraced the body-worn cameras so that they can have the real story come out when they have an interaction with the citizen, and if somebody wants to complain, they can go to the body-worn camera and say, well, here's exactly what happened. So in that regard, it's good. The challenges with the body-worn camera program is that it is extremely expensive. The cameras themselves are not that expensive, but the storage of the video is very expensive, and then being able to provide that video to the media and to other folks who want to view it. Those are all challenges, and it's new in policing, so you have to, when you implement a body-worn camera, it has to be done in a very thoughtful way. You have to get input from the community and from the media, for example, as to exactly what needs to be seen. There are privacy issues that need to be considered. Police officers see folks in conditions sometimes where those folks don't want that to be publicly displayed. And so you have to be able to protect those privacy rights. You know, at the same time, there's a transparency in law enforcement that you have to provide that information to the media if they want it. So, like I said, I don't think that anybody has the perfect policy on body-worn cameras, but it's a policy that has to be done very thoughtfully, and probably after you implement a policy, you're going to have to get some feedback from the groups that are affected and make some changes to it. It will get it right. But there's going to be some challenges because the technology is relatively new. But like I said, it's not going to solve all your problems, but I'm in favor of it. I think it's a good move.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you for the question. Body-worn cameras is an amazing tool for law enforcement to have that will show and demonstrate, I hope, oftentimes how efficient and how professional our officers were and are. I co-chaired a committee, a statewide committee for the California Police Chiefs Association to review 20 and 30 different policies, procedures, and practices on the implementation, purchasing, buying, storage, rolling out of body-worn cameras, so much so that I was asked to testify before the California State Assembly, and some would say that as a panelist, I'm a technical subject matter expert on body-worn cameras from a police chief standpoint. So I'm very fortunate, and I'm an advocate of body-worn cameras, but they are a tool. And we've been successful in rolling body-worn cameras out in the Oxnard Police Department, so I'm excited about that opportunity, and I'm excited for a number of different reasons. Our officers really wanted those cameras. They wanted them to show people that they are professional and that they can do what they do. We worked together with the labor associations. I do see a member of the labor association here. We worked together to come up with and develop a policy that was going to work for both of us. But at the same time, the community has been asking us for body-worn cameras. Get something on folks so we can see what they do and why they're doing what they're doing. So I'm happy to report that we've met both sides of the equation, that we have body-worn cameras from the officer standpoint, body-worn cameras from the community standpoint. But just remember, when you see that film and when you see it on YouTube, all you're seeing is a snippet of information. You are not seeing what happened before. You're not seeing what happened afterwards. So if you have a strong relationship with your community, and if you've been upfront and transparent with your community and how you're going to roll out body-worn cameras, the fact that you absolutely have to protect the rights of others, working with the ACLU at times, working to protect those individual rights too, you can have a successful program. But just remember, you're only seeing a snippet of the information. You're not seeing the full picture. So I would hope that you would trust in your chief in order to roll that out.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
As you've heard from Chiefs Newsham and Williams, body-worn cameras are a tool. They're a critically important tool, however, especially here in 2016. In the law enforcement profession, we've realized the DNA effect, that there needed to be that critical piece of evidence. Well, now we're at a time where we need something else when we talk about tipping the scales to show that we're being a very transparent organization and we're doing our job the right way. I've had the opportunity to oversee the body-worn camera for the Phoenix Police Department since our very first pilot program in March of 2011. The Phoenix Police Department secured a Department of Justice Smart Policing Initiative grant in partnership with Arizona State University, where we were able to study, deploy, and evaluate body-worn cameras. As a result of that federal grant, I've had the opportunity to conduct presentations for and trainings for the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police, the Texas Police Chiefs Association, and the National Troopers Coalition. I also have had the opportunity to provide testimony here at the state legislature, and in February of last year, I was invited to the White House where I sat on the Bureau of Justice Assistance National Body-Worn Camera Expert Panel, where we were charged with developing the National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit for agencies that are looking to roll out the technology. That was an incredible honor. I've also had the opportunity to develop the policy for the Phoenix Police Department based on this training and experience. And what we did, to Chief Williams' point, we invited labor to sit at the table to help us draft that policy. Then we took that policy to our 12 citizen advisory boards and we shared it with them. We asked them, are there gaps? Are there things that we can do differently? And we've developed a policy that protects the rights of citizens while also capturing critical evidence. As a department, we're prepared to buy up to 2,000 body-worn cameras and to fully deploy the technology over the next 5 years. And I believe that based on my training and my experience as a police chief, I will play a key role in helping to move the program forward.
Well, since this is a job interview, let's ask a standard job interview question that someone has asked. In all your years in law enforcement, what are you most proud of, and what has been your single greatest achievement in the communities that you served? Mr. Kurtenbach, we'll start with you.
I briefly mentioned earlier that I have not always worked in communities where I have looked like those that I have had the honor to serve. In fact, I've spent 17 years of my career working in the South Mountain and the Maryville precincts. And in this profession, we're not in uniform today, but if you've been doing this job for a while, you can get a lot of shiny things that you can put on your uniform that are very important department awards that show that you've done something that rises to the level that the department recognizes you for what you've done. But when you ask singularly what was the single most important thing, award, or recognition that I received, quite humbly, I have to say that when I was recognized as the Maryville Man of the Year in 2015 by the Maryville Revitalization Corporation and the residents of that amazing community, that was a complete shock, and it was very humbling because here's what it told me. It told me that I, as a police officer, had found a way to connect with my community, that I, as a police officer, and I loved what was said before, and Chief Williams said it, I'm not Assistant Chief Kurtenbach or Commander Kurtenbach, I'm Mike. And when people know me as Mike, that's how we really affect that change. So when we talk about the one thing, it was receiving that award, which I display proudly on my wall right over here at 620 West Washington, because that told me that I must have at least done something right.
Ms. Williams?
Okay, let's start again. Thank you. 28 years in law enforcement, 22 years with the Phoenix Police Department, and 5 years, 5 pretty tough years, to be honest, at the Oxnard Police Department, managing that agency and organization. So I could sit here, I'm like Mike, man. I could talk about 15 or 20 things I'm excited about. So pick one.
Yeah, but we want the single.
Exactly, I know, because I know that little yellow light's going to come on in a minute, too. So pick one. I was fortunate and blessed to be recognized as the California State Assembly District 44's Woman of the Year. And it wasn't because you're this wonderful, amazing rock star, Jerry Williams. Wasn't that at all. It was because I represented law enforcement. We had a tough year in law enforcement going these past couple of years, and specifically in the city of Oxnard. We've had protests, we've had all kinds of things. So for someone in the state of California to realize, and some of the things that were written about me was engaging the community, building trust, being approachable, being accountable, being transparent, opening up herself and being herself to the community is one of the reasons why I got recognized. Actually standing there on that assembly floor, being the sole person in uniform, because no other police officer was on that assembly floor, was humbling. And that would definitely be the only word that I would use. And I'm not starstruck at all, but when you're there at the assembly and someone sees you as a police officer, I represent you. I represent this community when I put on a uniform, and that recognition was definitely one of the best experiences that I've had in my 28 years of law enforcement. So thank you.
Mr. Newsham?
I wasn't one of those folks who always wanted to be a police officer. In fact, I went to school and I was a political science major. And as any good political science major does when they graduate from college, they go to Washington, D.C. to try and get a job up on Capitol Hill. So that was my plan. I went to Washington, D.C., and at the time I think they were paying $13,000 a year to work up on Capitol Hill. And Pete Newsham was not going to be able to afford to live on $13,000 a year, even back in 1988. So I joined the Metropolitan Police Department, and from the moment that I walked in the door, it has been the best experience of my life. I tell young people all the time that are thinking about policing, this is the career you want to be in, because when you get to the stage in your career where I am now, you can reflect back and you can say, listen, I did something worthwhile. And when you talk about our greatest achievement, and I think it's one of my greatest achievements, when I walked in the door at the Metropolitan Police Department, we did not have a very good reputation. We had a very serious and significant crime problem in the District of Columbia. We were recognized as the murder capital of the country. We have turned that police department around. We are a very well-recognized organization. We have had our trials and tribulations. I have learned a great deal from that experience, and I would like the opportunity to take all the things that I've learned throughout my career and all the challenges that we faced and bring them here to Phoenix and do the same thing, make this a better organization. So thank you.
Our next question is from a slightly different perspective. How do you plan to interact with the police union, city council, and civil service review board as your role as chief of police? And we'll ask this of all three of you, and we'll start with Ms. Williams.
So thank you for that question. As a police chief in the city of Oxnard, that's what I do every day, is I literally manage and walk that line between working with the labor organizations, working with my employees, working with city leadership, working with city management, working with the community. So that won't be anything new for me. Quite frankly, having had experience as well as the assistant chief over South Zone Patrol, as well as running a command precinct, Central City Precinct, that's what we did all the time. So this is not anything new. But I will say this, we do need to maintain those lines of communication. We do need to have open and effective communications working with our labor organizations, and it doesn't mean when things are bad. We need to have that type of relationship when things are good. When it comes to the Civil Service Board also, I welcome the opportunity to work with them when they make disciplinary decisions that ultimately comes down to the police chief to implement. Fortunately or unfortunately, I've had those occasions where I've had to terminate people who have not made the right decision, those persons who have violated the law, those persons who have violated policy and procedure and practice. And during the course of the investigation, while not jeopardizing the investigation, worked hand in hand with the labor organizations as we talked through and discussed these things, accepted what the civil service is saying with that employee also. When you're a police chief, you have these type of incidents that happen day and night, often and all the time. It does not mean that they are easy to manage, but it is not a new experience for me. It is something that will just be value added, I do believe, if I'm the police chief with the City of Phoenix. So in wrapping up, I do believe in working with the labor organizations and listening to the civil service and making those ultimate decisions, but you do have to have relationships and you do have to share that information with the community. So thank you.
Mr. Newsham?
Okay, we got three groups, and we got 2 minutes, so I'm going to have to go really quick. The unions, we had the labor union for the sworn members in Washington, D.C. is a fraternal order of police, and the relationship between the chief and the fraternal order of police was not very good for a period of time. We had as many as 100 unfair labor practices that had been filed by the fraternal order of police. So about 2 years ago, Chief Lanier asked me if I could work with the labor organizations and see if we couldn't do something about those unfair labor practices. Over the course of those 2 years, we've been able to mediate 70 of those. And what I've learned from that experience is exactly how you deal with those situations. You're not necessarily going to agree all the time with labor, but you have to communicate, and you have to meet with them regularly, and you have to respect and agree to disagree sometimes. And with that relationship, Delroy Burton was the chairman of the Fraternal Order of Police at the time. We have developed an excellent relationship. At the end of the day, management and labor want the same thing. They want a police department that everybody can be proud of, and if you put that as the #1 goal, all of the small disagreements can be resolved. With the City Council, I deal with the City Council in Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. We have 13 City Council members. I feel as though my role as an assistant chief in D.C. is to give them information about what policing is, what I need to do my job, and they can, they'll listen, and a lot of times they provide that for me. If the legislation gets passed, and there's a lot of input that goes into legislation, and I think my role is to say exactly how this is going to impact policing, how it's going to impact the community from a policing standpoint. And then lastly, the Civil Service Commission. I would like to have a relationship as the chief of police here in Phoenix where if I had to make the decision to terminate an employee, that they agreed with it. And they were going to fulfill that, because that's one of the toughest decisions that a police chief will have to make, is to get rid of an employee. So as quick as I could, I completed it. Thank you.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
From the chief of police to the newest rookie that's out on the street, we're all police officers. So regardless of your rank, you just have a different job. And I think it's important to be mindful of that. We need to hold our officers to the highest standards possible, the standards that you expect of our officers. But that doesn't mean that there needs to be an adversarial relationship between labor and management. In Phoenix, we have the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association that represents the rank and file, the men and women that are out there doing the job every day. And we have the Phoenix Police Sergeants and Lieutenants Association that represents our first and second level supervisors. Throughout my career, I've committed to working with those organizations because I started as part of those organizations. So that gives me insight into understanding their perspectives. Remember what I said, we all want the same thing, we just have a different job. We talk in law enforcement a lot about procedural justice, and procedural justice is critically important, but we need to have internal procedural justice as well. I mentioned earlier the criticality of modeling behavior. So we want to treat our officers with dignity and respect. We want to give them voice. We want to be trustworthy and remain neutral because we expect them to do the very same thing out in the community. That's what I bring. That's what I brought as a commander. That's what I bring as the Community Services Division Assistant Chief. I've had to walk people out the door. I've had to take badges and guns. But you know what? When you work with labor, they'll help you do that because you work together, because not everybody has the honor and the ability of wearing the uniform and wearing the badge. When we talk about our elected officials, it's all about partnership. They represent their constituencies. Again, it's all about working collectively for the greater good of our communities, identifying where there are gaps in services, identifying where there are opportunities for improvement, and being available, being communicative. And civil service is a critically important check and balance for a police chief. They have an important job to do to make sure that I, as a police chief, am meting out discipline appropriately so that we can all respect the process and so that we all understand the rules that we're operating under. Thank you.
From a very general question to a pretty specific one, someone in the room has asked this question, says the cartoid restraint technique or cartoid artery control technique is a use of force that falls just under lethal force in the City of Phoenix Police Department operation orders. If you become the new chief, would you remove this type of force from all training within the police department? And they want you to explain your answer, yes or no. And Mr. Kurtenbach, we'll start with you.
The carotid control technique was adopted after a very unfortunate incident in the city of Phoenix in 1994 when a gentleman was unfortunately killed with police contact when a chokehold was inappropriately applied. So what the carotid control technique does, if it's properly applied, is it restricts blood flow and oxygenation to the brain. It doesn't cause any harm if it's done the right way, but what it does is it allows you to take somebody who's combative into custody safely without causing any harm. There's no bruising, there's no gunshot wound, there's no violence beyond that. The key is doing it the right way. We just conducted an evaluation of the carotid control technique in the Phoenix Police Department, and we found that over the last 5 years, we've applied it just under 50 times. And so what we're doing as a training bureau, and remember I oversee training for the department, is going back to our officers, ensuring that they're applying it the right way. It's like lethal force. It is one of those things that isn't applied very often, but when you do have to use lethal force, you want to make sure it's done the right way. It's the same thing with the carotid control technique, that if our officers are in a situation where they believe that this is the only opportunity to render a situation safe, to take somebody into custody to not cause harm, we want to make sure that they do it the right way. So the answer to the question is, I will keep the carotid control technique in our use of force policy, just continue to affirm that it is applied properly, that our officers are trained the right way in its use. Thank you.
Mr. Newsham?
Yeah, we in Washington, D.C., we've dealt with this issue with the carotid neck restraint as well. When I first came on the Metropolitan Police Department, it was something that was taught to our officers to use. It has since been restricted as a use of force in the District of Columbia because it is an extremely dangerous technique, and like Mike said, if it's not properly applied, you could end up taking somebody's life. You're dealing with the blood flow to their brain. So I would have to, if I were the chief of police here in Phoenix, I'd have to get some sense from labor where they stand on this issue, if they think that it's a necessary tool, because there are, like Mike said, there are a lot of alternatives in uses of force, and so we don't ever want our officers in a position where they can't protect themselves in a dangerous situation, and as a last resort, that carotid neck restraint may be necessary for an officer to protect their own lives. And so I don't like the fact that they completely restricted it in Washington, D.C., because I think it has to be one of the tools, but I also think it has to be one of those tools that's used as a last resort. If you're in a situation where you're in hand-to-hand combat and your own life is in danger or somebody else's life in danger, it may be necessary. And like I said, because I don't know where labor stands here on that issue. But I would have to find out and see how the community feels about it. I mean, if you go out and the folks in the community say, we do not want to see our police officers using this technique, then I'd have to give that some very serious consideration.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you. So I'm going to share a story with you. Out in patrol in Maryville Precinct on a second-story balcony. I'm waiting for my backup to show up and roll up to me, and me and this guy, the fight was on, and the cavalry wasn't there. The cavalry wasn't coming. Tight space, tight quarters, couldn't get my gun. So I had to apply the carotid control technique, and it worked effectively. It was effectively applied. I was trained properly. So I will say this, training, education, but know this, that policy is a living, breathing document, that if something is changed and something goes awry, we constantly and consistently look at that policy, procedure, and practice, that we constantly and consistently engage with other law enforcement entities and use of force experts across the country, just to make sure that what we're doing and what we're using and how our officers are applying it is effective, is safe, is useful. I too would agree that I would listen to the voices of the community, but at the same time, we do have to operate and function, and I know this may come as no surprise. There are some people out there who don't want to go to jail willfully. There are people out there who are, exactly. So we have to give our officers options for things, and those options, if it's something that can be done safely for both the officer as well as the person involved, and we resolve the situation in the scenario when you call us for service, then I think that we've done our job. So training, policy, procedure, practices, just keep abreast of what's going on, and make sure that we are up to speed with everything that's going on with the tactics and operations in the Phoenix Police Department is what I would do as your police chief.
So we're reaching the end of the time we have, and I have one last question that I'm going to ask all three of you that's coming from someone in the room, and then we'll have time for some final remarks from each of you. This last question is, as chief of police, what would you do to help an area of businesses that are being ignored by the city that needs to be kept safe and free of blight? Mr. Newsham, we'll start with you.
I don't know how to answer that. I can't imagine that there hasn't been communication between that group of businesses, and I know that we're going to be provided with the questions that have been asked by the community. So I'd like to find out who that group of businesses is. If I were the chief of police, one of my first orders of business would be to reach out to that community, the business community. When I talked earlier about everyone that's involved in the community, your business is just a part of your community as everybody else is. You want your business, talk about eyes and ears, the ability of businesses to communicate with their employees, to provide video to the police department, to not have that cooperative working relationship, I think would be troubling to me, and I think it's something that would have to be corrected right away. So I can't imagine a situation. We deal in Washington, D.C. With our businesses like we do with any other part of the community. They need police services just like everyone else, and I believe that we have a cooperative relationship. Of course, we do have some business owners in the district who don't want to work cooperatively, and what we do is we bring them into line. But the large majority of the folks that we're dealing with are good people trying to make an honest living. And to the extent that someone's being ignored, I would have to correct that. So thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Very much. Economic development for this city is directly tied to businesses feeling safe and feeling connected with its police department. So I had a great conversation today with one of the business chambers who expressed an interest in wanting to get more involved and more engaged with both the economic development standpoint as well as the safety standpoint. So my answer in response to that question would be to begin and start a business advisory board, if you will, where we have the chambers come in, different businesses come in to the fold and into the group, where the police chief is sitting at the table listening to the concerns of the business community, as well as coming up with solutions on how we can make people feel more safe. At the same time, though, I think it's important to involve neighborhood service, economic development, because it's not just a police issue, it's actually making our city a better place. And I will tell you, when I come back home, every time I see a new development happening in our city, I am amazed. So we do have a bit of a gap in that regard here with the Phoenix Police Department, and I am definitely the person to lead that charge. I'm looking over at my husband real briefly, and I know that the little light's gonna click, but when Cody was a city councilman, he worked very hard to bring businesses to District 8 to remove that stigma that people had about quote unquote South Phoenix. And I would continue on with some of the things that Cody worked on, bringing businesses together, having people sit at the table, having regular meetings with the businesses, as well as involving other city departments to make sure that we're doing and we're moving forward. It's an amazing and excellent opportunity, by the way, and I'm definitely ready to take that one on. So thank you.
Mr. Kurtenbach?
Chief Williams is absolutely right. Economic development drives cities. And that's where law enforcement's role is so important in ensuring that those businesses that want to call Phoenix home feel safe and secure when they do so. So it's a genuine partnership. In law enforcement, we don't just represent segments of the community. We don't decide who we want to work with. We work with everybody. And everybody's issues are our issues, and they're critically important that we resolve them jointly. So in the Phoenix Police Department, at the precinct level, we have community action officers who are geographically deployed, whose job it is to interact with all of those in that specific area. They're assigned to community program squads. They work for precinct commanders, and they're supported by our Community Relations Bureau. There was a period of time in the Phoenix Police Department where perhaps we didn't put as much investment in proactive policing, the development of those relationships that I've talked about all evening. What now, going back to that COPS hiring grant that I mentioned earlier, we're bringing a safe business coordinator back into the fold so they can work directly with community businesses, so we can identify those gaps. I love the idea of a advisory board that works directly with our businesses, because we have our business leaders that are represented through all 12 of our advisory boards, but there are some very unique needs there. So what we're doing already is we're working cooperatively with them. We're working with the Safe Business Network to identify specific needs, because if we're failing a segment of our community, if they're somewhere in the city where they are not getting the resources they need, then as police chief, I'll make sure that we fix that.
Going through a job interview is never easy. You've all been through a job interview, I'm sure, at some point. You're sitting there, you're looking across from the person asking the questions, and you're thinking, how am I going to survive this? These three just did it with an entire audience looking at them, including television cameras, so I think we should give them a round of applause. And now, in the spirit of that classic job interview question, I've got one more for you. Give you 2 minutes to kind of sum it all up. And we're going to start with you, Ms. Williams. And the question is, why do you want to be the chief of police here in Phoenix?
So I want to be the chief of police in Phoenix because I left here 5 years ago. I left my comfort. I left everything known to me to get that experience, to take that experience and bring it back home and be the City of Phoenix Police Chief. I can't tell you that when I look at that blue uniform and I look at the folks standing back there in the back, I almost want to do this to you guys because I'm so proud of this agency. It's a place that I grew up. It's the place that I know. It's the people that I know. Chief Joe Yonner, and I don't think Joe is in the audience, he has done an amazing job rebuilding this agency and organization, and he has put into place a number of practices that if I am selected and fortunate enough to be your police chief, that I will continue on to move our agency forward. I have the experience, I have the stamina, I have the drive, I have the compassion, I have the listening ability, I have the leadership ability, I have the faith, I have the belief that you are looking at your police chief sitting right here, and I am looking so forward to working with you as a community. The police officer standing back there in the back, I'm looking forward to working with you. I really want to come home, and this is definitely where I want to come back to finish my law enforcement career and to take all that experience that I've learned when I left this place and work to make us a better community. So thank you for that.
Mr. Newsham?
Who wouldn't want to be the chief of police in Phoenix? I see a couple people smiling out there in the audience, but I had indicated earlier, I didn't initially, I didn't always want to be a police officer. I came into policing and I found it was truly my path in life. I have learned a lot of, because I was fortunate to get promoted earlier in my career, and I work in a city which is a very busy city. We host inaugurations, we host mass demonstrations. It's the experience that I've had in my 16 years as a command official is something that I would like to share with the folks in Phoenix. I think my best trait and the trait that you will like the most about me is my disposition. I appreciate and see the need for criticism of police because criticism makes us better. Like I said, if you're not going to have tough skin, then you're not going to be a good chief police. And then my other very strong asset is these two very large items on the side of my head. And as a chief of police, you really do have to listen. If you're going to listen, you're going to be compassionate, and you're really going to care about the work that you do, then you're going to be a very good chief of police. And I think I have a lot to offer the city of Phoenix, and I would be honored if you would consider me to be your chief of police. And thank you very much for having me here. You have a wonderful city.
And finally, Mr. Kurtenbach.
I'm keenly aware of the myriad challenges that are facing the law enforcement profession today and the tremendous responsibility that comes with being the chief of police of the 6th largest city in the United States. Remember, I said the best city and the best department in the nation. I'm unapologetic about that. I believe that my life and work experience, combined with my commitment to servant leadership and inclusivity, have uniquely prepared me to lead this amazing organization. Chief Williams is right. Chief Joseph Yonner has done an incredible job of not just stabilizing this department, but moving it forward. And I have had the opportunity to learn under Chief Yonner, to be mentored by him. And I want to build upon his legacy. Here's what you get out of me. I'm a collaborative, progressive, transcendent leader. I am constantly seeking opportunities to improve. I am not the smartest person in any room, and I've learned that long ago. So I don't care about the credit. In fact, if there's credit to be had, I can promise you I'll be back at the credit line. But if there's responsibility to be taken or sacrifice to be made, it's my job as your chief to be at the front of the sacrifice and the responsibility line. I understand the value of partnerships, of relationships, of genuine collaboration. I believe that it is critical for a police chief, and I possess this, to possess two important traits, respectability and relatability. And with regard to relatability, I've developed a communication style that allows me to connect with those that I serve, so that this is truly our police department. So why do I want to be police chief? Well, remember, this is my town. I grew up here. I'm a native. I don't want any other job. This is the job. If you would humble me to give me, this is where I want to be, to serve you. And based upon my experience, based on what I've learned through this department, what I've learned from you, I am very, very confident that we can take this department to those places that we want it to be, so we can affirm our role as the best police department in the nation. Thank you.
You have participated in a spectacular event tonight. You got to interview the incoming chief of police here in Phoenix. So I think you all deserve a round of applause along with our candidates. It's been a pleasure to be your moderator, and I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Julie Waters.
I'd like to give a round of applause to Rick DeBrule, our moderator, who did a fine job this evening. It has been a great evening. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and excuse the candidates and family members. Go right over here to city staff, and we're going to get you to phase 2 of our evening. So just to recap, the next step for this process is for these 3 candidates to participate in another round of in-person interviews. After that, the city manager's office will review the results. The appointment of the new police chief will be made by the Phoenix city manager. That announcement is expected to be made sometime in July, and the new chief will begin in October, right before Chief Yonner retires. The final part of this evening's agenda is much more informal for these candidates. We will now close this meeting out, and everyone who's here tonight is invited to a casual meet and greet across at City Hall. Please use caution when crossing the street. For those of you who are joining us on Phoenix TV or phoenix.gov, we want to thank you. And for everyone in this audience, let's just give a round of applause. And what a great turnout we had tonight. It shows that the citizens of Phoenix really care and want to have a voice in this. And we thank you for your time.